Hello, this is Abhivardhan from the Bharat Pacific, and here we are for again an interesting interview as a part of Bharat Pacific interviews. I'd like to introduce our guest for this session. We have Abhishek Mishra from the Observer Research Foundation, and with me we have our co-host Aditya Jakki. So let me introduce the guest quickly. As again, like we had in the previous discussion, we will be discussing unique aspects of our guest's work and the current paradigms as to how they have developed so far. So, like in the previous discussion, we had discussed about G20 and the Indo Pacific. This time, our focus will be on blue economy and Indo African ties concerning the global south and obviously this G20 presidency, which we have. We also have a very interesting update that India has obviously, taken up the Security Council presidency as a non-permanent member for a month. So maybe certain aspects of security could be discussed. So Abhishek is currently an associate fellow with ORF's Strategic Studies program. He has pursued his PhD in African Studies from the University of Delhi's Department of African Studies. Uh, his work mostly involves research in Indo-African relations, and I was trying to, we have had Abhishek even before in our discussions for IGP, which was the predecessor of Bharat Pacific. And we have had discussions on Indo African relations sometimes, but I think that um, beyond development and BRI and those things which we generally consider in Africa, I guess there are much more avenues which will come, which we should discuss when it comes to Indo African relations. So, Abhishek, welcome to the Bharat Pacific, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Good afternoon, Abhivardhan and Aditya. Thank you. Thank you to Bharat Pacific for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So I'll begin with a simple question for the sake of understanding of our viewers. When we look at Indo-African relations, and we are not in the Nam era anymore. I mean, there is a different history which we share with countries like Ghana, Kenya, and others in the Nehruvian times. But when we look at these times, like after Narasimha Rao, like I would say under Prime Minister Modi, under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, we see that uh, India Africa relationship per se is not just about a continent and a country named India. It's about various African countries in the African Union. Some of them obviously a part of the West Asian region, such as Egypt and others, and some of which who are a part of the I would say a relationship with Europe also very specifically. For example, Morocco and others. But that's a different aspect to consider. When we look at Indo-African relations in these past 8 to 10 years, what is the key aspect which you find very much different between India and African countries when it comes to their cooperation, their joint projects and initiatives? What is the key aspect which you find different apart from this initiative that India is a leader of the global south, and India can help better to let African countries grow, since the United States is not able to help, Europe is not able to do much, although Europe is trying in its own way, and obviously there are predatory projects under the Chinese government. So, what do you think about the key aspect of Indo-African relations, which maybe our viewers may relate with? Yeah.
Yes. So when we basically talk about India and Africa, which are both two very important and critical pillars of the global South, we normally tend to refer to our, civilizational links and our historical links. The fact that India supported all the anti-colonial and anti-apartheid movements in Africa, and the amount of diasporic goodwill which India enjoys in the continent. But I believe that since the last 7, 8, or 10 years, especially since the current administration, Prime Minister Modi's administration has taken charge, I believe that the most important change which we have seen is in the form of the political and diplomatic relationship. The engagement has been uh, continuous. We have like systematically and in a sustained manner engaged with the African continent. The most visible manifestation of that is in the form of the number of high level visits which has taken place from both India and African side at the level of president, prime minister, vice president, and others. Uh, Over the last 4 5 years, more than 32 visits from the Indian side has taken place, and over 100 visits from African heads of state and government have taken place to India. So the diplomatic engagement has been very sustained, and on top of that, India is also planning to open around 18 to 9 around 18 new resident missions in African countries. After the opening of these missions, the total number of Indian resident missions, it will go up to 47 in 47 African countries. So that, I believe, has been the first important aspect of the change which we have seen over the last few years. The second aspect deals with the economic ties. Trade has systematically grown, although the potential to develop is vast. The current trade right now between India and Africa stands at nearly $90 billion, whereas investments stand at almost around 70 to $73 billion. Now, these numbers, yes, it can go up, but it's at the same time, given our capacities, given our own developmental challenges which we face back at home, I think these numbers are on the rise, and the trend is a positive. It's a positive trend. We have introduced various new initiatives. India and Africa, we engage in three levels basically. First is at the continental level with the African Union. The second is at the regional level with the regional economic communities of Africa. And the third is the bilateral level. Uh, in my view, in the bilateral level, we have had the most success till now. But at the same time, we have again regularly been engaging the African Union and the African regional economic communities as well. We plan to very recently, India has signed a free trade area with Mauritius, which is the which is the first African country with whom India has signed a free trade area agreement. And there are similar talks currently in the negotiation stage to sign similar FTAs with economic communities like SADC and COMESA, etc. So yes, so in terms of political, the sustained engagement, in terms of economic, the level of trade and investment has increased. In terms of security aspects as well, we have seen that we have initiated some new uh, some new projects like the first ever in 2019 in Pune, the first ever India Africa field training exercise took place, in which nearly 17-18 contingents from 17-18 African countries participated. Then on 2020, we started the India Africa Defense Ministers Dialogue. Now that has been institutionalized. That takes place every year now in concurrence with the Def Expo. So it takes place uniformly every year. Uh, and the biggest indication is the Kampala principles, or commonly known as the 10 guiding principles for India Africa engagement, which Prime Minister Modi enunciated during his speech at the Ugandan parliament back in July 2018. So these 10 principles, although they are not something new, but at the same time, they indicate India's willingness to become a more serious developmental partner for the African continent.
That's really interesting. I'd like to have an interesting follow up for that, but Aditya would like to ask a question. Yeah.
Yes. So you have highlighted that the trade volume is at the $90 billion, and the Indian investment since 1996 till the last fiscal years it was around $72 billion. But as the data shows, like most of this investments, especially large part of investment that India has done, has been through Mauritius route, and many suspect that large part of this amount may not have actually contributed to the African economy as the Indians would have liked to. And in the last few years, we have also seen that there has been an African Continental Free Trade Agreement in Africa. And the recent CII report has actually hope has shown willed in its report that maybe it will help Indian business and carry forward our investments to $150 billion by 2030. This in line with India's past efforts through Asia Africa Growth Corridor, which was an initiative with Japan, and India's line of credit amounting to $12 billion. how much actual concrete work, in addition to the development assistance, pure business to business cooperation and pure strategic cooperation, like India's strategic investment in Sri Lankan ports, or like in the neighborhood. Like yesterday, Financial Times has said that India has almost put for invested $32 billion, including big strategic investments by private sector in the Indian neighborhood. So at that scale, is anything is happening from India in Africa, and where does African Continental Free Trade Agreement fit in? Is it showing any benefits to Africa as an economy, and how does that fit in? So
Yes, thank you. So, see, yes, you're right. Most of our like India-Africa trade, it goes through Mauritius because of the favorable tax regime there. But it's just not Mauritius, you know. In fact, like we have invested, India has a lot of investments, as you know, in the textile and apparel industry in Ethiopia. India has recently again invested in the oil and gas energy sector in Mozambique. So it's not just Mauritius. Yes, Mauritius has the majority chunk of the Indian investments, but we are when India is looking towards like other countries as well, and not even not negating the West African countries as well. And there is, I mean, see, as I said, the potential is certainly there, but there are like certain like proper primary constraints to increasing India Africa trade. And the most important constraint is there's very limited access to trade finance. There is a lack of proper financing mechanisms, and also very limited access to trade related project finance, etc. uh, a lot of it has to do with some strict regulatory environment also in some African countries, that you know those tend to lead to international banks withdrawing from certain African countries, etc. And on top of that, in addition to limited trade finance, there are some transports and logistical costs as well. The shipping costs are high, the insurance costs are high when it comes to exporting to African countries, and all these high shipping and insurance costs, it has led many Indian exporters to sell on a many, you can say, like a free on board basis rather than on delivery basis. That And also the knowledge asymmetry between Indian private companies and the African public and private companies. This The knowledge asymmetry is mainly created, due to a severe lack of proper dissemination of information, and also to an extent completely a kind of a misunderstanding when it comes to our two geographies having to know each other about each other's diversity, both cultural, economic, political, social, etc. So these are like some reasons why the trade has not reached its full potential. And on top of that, there are some other like practical reasons as well. Like it sometimes, even when an Indian company would be interested in investing, uh, but the costs of like leasing a land, suppose for example, India and Japan, we have identified Kenya. In Kenya, we are building a cancer hospital. Like similarly, like with Saudi Arabia, sorry, with UAE, we are building a center for IT excellence in Ethiopia. So trilateral projects we have initiated, but from the African side also, I mean, they need to do some work. The stringent regulatory environment often hinders such kind of investment as well. That being said, the African continental free trade area, which you mentioned, that is very, very, very important. And that is where actually it is going to create the world's biggest like free trade market for the movement of free movement of goods, services, and labor as well. So once we know that the African Free Trade Area, it was operationalized on first of January this year, and initially they have started trading intra African trading is like starting to take off, all because currently the percentage of intra Africa trading is very low. It's like dismal. It's almost just 14 or 15%, something like that, compared to like over 60% for Asia, or around 38 39% in Europe. So intra-African trading needs to improve, and like the regional production hubs needs to come up, the so that we can the see the idea is always to like take up manufacturing bases to African countries. The ultimate aim should be not just selling or exporting made in India products to African countries. The ultimate aim should be for Indian government and private sector, business sector, to take all the manufacturing bases closer to African markets, set up manufacturing bases there, and then you make products which are targeted products for the benefit of the local population there, local markets. So with African continental free trade area, we have like enormous potential. India has vocally come out in support of African continental free trade area. We have already started a joint working group with their secretariat, which is based in Ghana. So the ball is already rolling. It's just that for such a free trade deal to come up and for its ultimate benefits to show up, it's going to take some time. But I'm confident that in the next half a decade or so, in the next 4 5 years or so, I think the proper results will start showing. And there has been some studies which has also indicated that after after the AFCFTA has been operationalized, there is potential for India Africa trade to grow by nearly $10 billion. So in terms of like India Africa trade, that's not a small amount, that's a decent amount. So once we have all these like networks set up in African countries, once it will be easier to travel from one African country to another, once the air and transportation costs of African countries that will come down, then Indian business persons will be more eager, and they will be less risk averse towards investing in African countries.
Small brief comment on like how AFCFTA is being received within Africa domestically. Like how has been the general response to the idea?
So AFCFTA basically, I mean, it marks a huge deal because see, African countries, if you like hear about them, they are always uh, having any unified comment or anything like that. Getting behind a unified project, it's often difficult, just because of how different all these countries are. Just like our Indian states, from one state to another, different languages, different norms, etc. So the fact that all these 54 countries, they have come together and banded and operationalized this AFCFTA free trade area, that is indicative of a big success, as a big political success for the continent, and very important one, I may say. And it has been received very positively. Yes, only removing trade barriers won't do. You have to remove the non-trade barriers along with it as well. So that's why like borders have to be much more porous. If they have to the transportation flight prices and all have to come down, it should be easier, so that goods, services, and products can like seamlessly go traverse from one part of the continent to another. So it has been received positively. I am wait. I think around 41 or 42 countries have acceded to the agreement, and around 30 to 35 of those countries have ratified also the agreement. And all these like include all the big guns like South Africa. Nigeria has initially had a lot of difficulties in accepting it, but at the same time, like now they have moved forward, because concerns are always there. Like with such a project, like the small countries will feel that okay, we won't be the winners of it if we are coming under one system or something like that. But at the same time, it's like for the broader political goal, it's for the broader economic resilience, for broader objectives. It has been received positively, absolutely.
So I'd like to talk about the G20, and of course I'll then connect my question to Indo-African relations, because I guess on the trade and economic front you have made really interesting points. And I think I was also reading in the past some of your briefs, for example a 2018 brief on maritime cooperation in East Africa, which is obviously correlated to the West Indian Ocean region. So I'd like to ask about the recent event which was conducted by ORF, which was the Kigali Global Dialogue.
Right.
So a quite significant event in my view. I was thinking about it, and um, kind of a forum where global and African considerations were discussed in a much different way, because usually what happens is that when you have forums wherein you have governments or organizations from, maybe let us say, countries from the global north or so, the tone and I would say the generic theme of discussion remains at the same pedestal. We know that they're very predictable and so forth. I mean, I'm not saying there's a large deviation, but what does the dialogue do in my view is that it offers alternative voices and alternative, I would say, discourses on Africa, the global context, and what India can do. So what do you think, what overall do you think about the Kigali dialogue? Yeah.
Yes, so Kigali Global Dialogue has been a very unique initiative which has been started by Observer Research Foundation. The first edition of it was took place in 2019, and the second edition it just took place in August of this year. Uh, Kigali Global Dialogue, basically, it's hosted by Observer Research Foundation in partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Government of Rwanda, and also the Rwandan Convention Bureau. Kigali Global Dialogue, around over this year, we saw the over 150 participants from around nearly 44, 45 countries participated. And this conference basically, it brings together, policymakers, civil society folks, academics, academic practitioners, and also the private sector from around the world. And the aim and objective of it is to like deliberate and devise solutions to some critical sustainable developmental challenges which both India and the African continent faces today, and the global community faces today. This year's dialogue was very, very interesting because a lot of the focus we placed emphasized on how it's important to rethink multilateral institutional financial architecture which is at place, and in order to basically better serve the developmental imperatives of the global south, of African countries, of India as well. So we the question of global governance and what even Prime Minister Modi has reiterated in terms of like reformed multilateralism, why it is so important for the voices of like nearly 2.7 2.8 billion, the combined population of India and Africa. Why is it important that we can't leave African voices and Indian voices from outside the decision making table? And that is why India I mean, under his G20 presidency, India is officially supporting the inclusion of African Union as its 21st member, because right now it's only South Africa which is a part of the G20, and we know that Africa has 54 there are 54 countries in the continent. So only South Africa it's can't represent all the voices of the entire African continent, from west, north, east, etc. So that's why and the by including the African Union, it's only going to echo the type of representation that the European Union also reflects as a member of G20. We know that the European Union is a member of G20, but there are countries like France or Germany or even Italy who are members in addition to African Union, in addition to European Union. So the possibility for South Africa, then African Union, and in the future some other African country also joining and making the G20 or G21, G22 is there, because like, see, I mean, it's a very opportune moment for India to support Africa's inclusion, African Union's inclusion, because we have seen that, like, for India, Africa, the African continent's development, it is very fundamental and very central to Indian own foreign policy goals, and it is in fact in many ways a prerequisite if the world, if the global order is to become truly multipolar. We have promptly and vocally always supported African representation in all these multilateral organizations. Uh, in fact, even our external affairs minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, he also like said that like he also said that like India's belief is that Africa's growth and progress, it is intrinsic to any sort of a global rebalancing. So I believe, yes. So G20 is a very important. I mean, this our Indian presidency here, and supporting Africa's inclusion, African Union's inclusion it's come at a very opportune moment, and I hope that it comes true also during our presidency.
Yeah. So here is a follow up now. This follow up is one in since you referred development. There was one of the interesting themes in the dialogue, which was a multipolar world, the geopolitics of development. Now you made the, I would say, you gave the complete picture of how development related cooperation is important. We discussed about trade and economic affairs, and of course, uh, why it is important to deal with the non-trade issues. So when we take into consideration the idea of a multipolar world, we already know what Honorable Dr. Jaishankar, the India's external affairs minister, says, and even his book explains the idea of a multipolar world. We are way beyond the Eurasian concept of multipolar world from Dugin and others. Now India also has its own idea of a multipolar world. There's existing literature, but I'm curious to ask you about the Indian African aspect of it. And the reason I'm asking is because now that India is trying in its best way through governments, through the private sector, and others to help Africa grow and sustain itself in a better way, which will take time, as you said, half a decade, and it will take some time to, I would say, reap some results. What do you think is the shift in, I would say, let's not talk about shift because that's later, we can discuss maybe. What do you think is the African perspective on multipolarity from a development point of view, from a security point of view? And maybe we can then jump to G20 and maybe the UNSC presidency. What do you think? Yeah.
Yes, particularly like for G20, when it comes to G20 and Africa, if we're talking about that, the f- the focus is like not new. The focus has always been there. In fact, the focus was initially the initial any sort of initial reference was I think made way back I think in the Toronto summit in 2010, during which like African countries they sought financial support through concessional lending to to its bank, multilateral bank, the African Development Bank, that was promised during even despite the 2008, of course, the financial crisis. Uh, African countries, I mean, see, they have always consistently they have been invited to G20 summits. It's just that like all these sort of engagements also it eventually coalesced into a G20 compact with Africa under that was started in under the German presidency, I believe, back in 2017. Uh, so G20 is focused on Africa and or how African countries they want how currently they are viewing this compact or their views on multilateralism. It is not something new, and and from the Indian side also, India has always also supported because we there is a we have supported the common African position, which is in support or in favor of two permanent African members for at the United Nations Security Council and three non-permanent members at the UNSC as well. So India has officially supported. It has come out officially. It's documented in our MEA's website as well. So we have supported the common African position, and all this is basically stated in the Isulvini consensus and also the Sete declaration of the African Union. So the focus is not new. It's just that the under Indian presidency, this is the most opportune time. The moment is now for India basically to step up its game. We have been doing a lot of initiatives, but it's actually the time for India to step up its game and distinguish itself as a real alternative, a real partner who can make a difference in the African continent. Yeah.
Aditya, feel free to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, now I would like to focus a bit from the micro issues of development cooperation to more macro these days we call it like grand projects or like the intercontinental connectivity projects. Now, recently there has been a series of reporters saying that China under its BRI has been kind of mellowing down, especially since the pandemic. It has not yet focused on the revival of new projects or like a series of funding to the existing projects and all. And like several reporters said that China has kind of stopped some of its work under BRI. And today I read a report one of the China Africa research initiatives at John Hopkins University is saying that a lot of the reporters saying that it's the debt trap diplomacy and all is kind of misinterpreted. It says that it is just a rising economy trying to unwillingly or exuberantly giving funds or like a debt at like without checking properly and just misallocating its financing. That is what it is. So how do you see this attempt at like creating new narrative with respect to BRI, especially about Africa? It is trying to say, and how do you think Africa will try to receive this? Where does African perspective of this financing stand? And second complementary question is, in adjacent to this, like again, I mentioned this before, there has been a lot of talk about how India is stepping up its game in terms of infrastructure financing in its neighborhood. How does India's infrastructure financing fit in Africa, especially that now EU has started its global gateway network, and India EU has in the past few years talked about like cooperating on these projects in Africa. So where is this moving? So thanks.
Yes. So, okay. So for BRI, yes, there has been a lot of reports that, especially after the economic impact from COVID-19, the pandemic, there has been a recession in terms of taking on hesitancy in from the Chinese government side in terms of taking on new projects or investing. So the all the days of China like throwing around lavish money, not just in Africa or even Latin America for that matter, or in our neighborhood, that is gone. But that is only gone for the short term. In the medium to long term, I personally believe that it's again going to come back. uh, and the concerns about this debt trap diplomacy, the thing is, see, we are aware of what's happening in Sri Lanka, but I personally, in my opinion, as of now there has not been any any evidence of any like physical asset seizure when it comes to China, or China coming and occupying this port or that port, or taking this or that into account. So there has not been any evidence. That's not to say that it may not happen in the future. That can very easily happen. But the problem is that the type of clauses, basically the type of clauses which China puts when it comes to their contracts, and the opacity and the non-transparent nature of these contracts. There is hardly any accountability. What happens is, it's a Chinese government, the Communist Party (CCP). They negotiate with the African governments. It's G2G strictly. And when they come up with all these contracts, what they do is they put all these non-disclosure clauses, which forces the host country to obey them. And on top of that, if they also have clauses like, if there is a dispute during the project or something, then the dispute will be settled by a court in China only, back home. So naturally, then then the problem arises as to, okay, will they be biased then in the final decision, or something or the other, like that. So the opacity and the non-transparent nature of the clauses, that's a genuine concern. But as far as China saddling all these like poor host countries, poor African countries or something, Latin American countries, uh, throwing a lot of money and in return asking for collaterals. I mean, see, in terms of, having collaterals, by the way, it's like not a practice which only China does. It's a very common practice. It's just that as of now, it suits the Western narrative, it suits Indian narrative to talk about debt trap diplomacy, and there are legitimate concerns. It's But we shouldn't assume that African countries, or the negotiating team which their governments are sending are, so bad at their job that they completely will overlook or bypass any any even properly glaring difficulties. Yes, I mean Africa. That is not to say that Africa doesn't have its problem. It in fact has a uh, lot of human resources problem as well in terms of capacity, and India helps African countries in those regards as well, in terms of like project preparation, preparing them for projects, etc., conducting environmental, sustainability surveys, etc. So India helps them. China is just that it's coming up with all these like opaque contracts. So that is where the problem, and that is where the negotiation between in this regard, after any particular African country and China, that would have to be much more transparent. And the civil society, African civil societies, they also need to come up, and the youth and civil society, they need to come up and play a bigger role. Uh, it should, I mean, any we can all agree that any sort of a contract should be open for public scrutiny, right? If you're not doing that, then suspicions will arise. Naturally, it's bound to arise. See what's happening in the Standard Gauge Railway contract in Kenya. Now, with the new government under William Ruto's government, they have now disclosed the some few parts of the contract, which of the standard gauge railway contract with China, and that is again, it has again taken the African social media by storm, and naturally, Indian media and the Western media is obviously pouncing on it, and there are some glaring problems in that contract. It's just that it needs to be addressed, but strictly in terms of debt trap diplomacy or any physical asset seizure, I don't think there has been any evidence as of that as of now. And
Yeah.
sorry, can you just repeat your second question? You
Yeah, like there has been a recent EU initiative in terms of global gateway network, right, to build infrastructure and all. And India has also in the past kind of shown its interest in building such infrastructure projects, connectivity infra, especially like power plants and roads, railways, etc. And EU has talked about cooperating with India. In addition to like it's kind of similar to what we try to do with Africa, Asia Africa Growth Corridor, but this is not as institutional as it is. It's more like a country project between EU and India. So especially India's cooperation in that.
yes, so the potential for trilateral projects, all these like 2+1 projects, is huge. I mean, we are in talks with UAE, we are in talks with Japan, we are in talks with France, with Germany. We already do some stuff with the US, and I'm talking all of these in Africa only. So it's like nothing new in terms of AAGC, Asia Africa Growth Corridor. Yes, it's an initiative of India and Japan back in 2017, but as of now, the discussions, it's still restricted to only the business to business talks. It's still not come up, any no particular projects at least has been identified. I mean, some projects have been identified in the private in terms of in the business sector, but they have not come out come up with it in open as of now. But I think with Japan, I mean, we are going to collaborate going forward. And with the European Union, see, the problem is that, I mean, yes, but the problem is the funds and identifying specific projects. I mean, that's where China does so well because it has the boots on the ground. It's known to deliver fast, is known to implement projects in a very timely manner. Yes, the quality of products, quality of infrastructure, that's another debate altogether. But if you just look at it from a like African perspective, you are seeing Chinese boots on the ground. So naturally, I mean, you will be welcoming of it. Whereas Global Gateway Initiative or AAGC, even, I mean, no particular projects are being identified. Nothing is moving on those fronts. So naturally, it's like the grasp of it, or people getting excited about it, it's reducing down. But that is not to say it's not going to revive back again. It is going to. And with a global gateway as well, like, yes, I mean, I'm certain we already do some capacity building work with I mean, we do a lot of capacity building work with the United Kingdom government, and also with Germany as well. And France, it's a very important maritime security partner also for India in the Indian Ocean or in the Western Indian Ocean region. So, infrastructure, and with Japan, of course, Japan is known as the norm setter when it comes to quality infrastructure. So with Japan also we will identify some projects. Some maybe, for example, like a port, a Kenyan port's modernization. Maybe Mombasa port, we are modernizing its infrastructure or something. Or cyber security is another area which again has enormous potential. So these are all areas as of now. That's the problem with initiatives like Global Gateway and all. It's just that, I mean, yes, it was released very enthusiastically, but look at it now. I mean, where is the funding? What projects are on the ground? Where is the ball rolling? So that's the main problem. And in terms of specifically, you asked about Indian infrastructure financing in the continent. Now there has been a shift. Basically, there has been a very strong focus, private sector focus, which we have seen in the recent years. And this year's CII Exim Bank India Africa conclave for good partnership, that also, like, in the talks which ensued there, that thing came up, that okay, that Indian private companies, they are very increasingly, they are exploring innovative ways of financing, like that can be blended financing, or the PPP model, which is widely considered to be the best model for infrastructure development. And even like things like pension funds and all as well, in addition to blended finance, etc. So India basically, like, we have always had a long standing aim to export Indian innovations, or in specifically in information technology, in IT, even in digital technology, and also like skill and knowledge transfer. And only in the last 5, 6, 7 years or so, that it has received a serious push. Whereas like nowadays we are seeing that the Indian private sector, it is like actively looking to play a major role in the African continent. So the interest is there, certainly. Yeah. So which is exciting times.
The reason why I emphasized on this was because, like, there has been, like, in the past few years, repeated comments saying that India wants to be part of all these projects, but India doesn't fund enough because it's still a smaller economy. It has its own domestic commitments in terms of development initiatives. That is why I was kind of so, with the growing economy of India, as you said, perhaps India will try to commit more in terms of financing in infrastructure, big projects, perhaps.
Yeah. So see, I mean, infrastructure is not the, like, see, when you talk about infrastructure, you think of Japan, right? So when you talk of or Japan or China for that matter, but when you talk about US or India, I mean, let's leave US, let's talk about India. When we talk about India, we think of capacity building, we think of human resource development. So that is why all these like innovative ways of financing is important. Whereas, okay, suppose we decide, India and Japan and UK decide to do a project in, suppose, say, Kenya, for example, some project. Now India is known for its human resource and capacity building, so we will look after that side. United Kingdom, through DFID and all, it can maybe fund the program, and Japan can probably chip in the sense that it can build the infrastructure. And after the suppose the project is done, then Indian personnel can stay back for a year or 2 years in that African country, in that setting, and teach the locals, okay, how to use this machine, or how to manage this project, like that. So that will be a complete, that's an example of how a completely successful trilateral project will look like. You can't expect just India only to go and to fund it, also to construct it also. I mean, we don't have the kind of money which China does, right? So we need to be much more like clever about all these like projects, and come up with more trilateral projects. And we are, in fact, like, we are taking a step in the right direction towards that. We are There are certain projects which are being discussed, and once they will come out in the media, I'm certain that many people are going to be excited about that, in terms of both connectivity, capacity building, development in East Africa, especially.
Great. So, to conclude, I just have one quick question, which is specifically on peacekeeping in Africa and the UNSC presidency, which is coming up. And this is a very quick question. So, the question is this: uh, this 1 month will just go down swiftly. I know that it's already December 2nd in India right now, but as this presidency will stay, the Security Council one, um, from a peacekeeping aspect in Africa, um, sh- do should we expect anything unique, specifically deviated from the Indian side on security issues in Africa? Anything which we must look out for? Yeah.
Just a
See,
small complementary question to it,
yeah.
like in conclusion, because he is talking about security and peacekeeping. Where does India France security cooperation in the African region stand in vis-a-vis peacekeeping in Africa? Because India France, I mean France security cooperation in Africa, because France is a old player there, and it is also has its own territories in the Western Indian Ocean. So what are India and Africa together doing in security terms or peacekeeping terms? Thank
Yeah. So see, I mean, India always been one of the largest troop contributing countries when it comes to United Nations peacekeeping missions in Africa. But I mean, currently, I believe there are around 5,500 to 6,000 Indian personnel deployed there wearing blue helmets. And the rhetoric behind it is that, like, I mean, both India and Africa, we do believe that peace and security, it's like peace and security is intrinsic to achieve any sort of economic development. Without one, the other can't be achieved. Now, that being said, and the fact that India has had a quite a like rich history of deployment, peacekeeping deployment, but nowadays, like, like the challenges are also getting more sophisticated in sense that questions of sovereignty arises. There is like questions of legitimacy in terms of, okay, do we even need any more peacekeeping in so and so country, XYZ country? And apart from these challenges, then the practical challenges are there. Oh, how many forces should we deploy? Where should we deploy? Which region? In northwest or northeast or southeast, or like those kind of operational challenges as well. And recently, what we have seen is those kind of operational challenges are coming out very frequently. I mean, more frequently than how much we would like. So that is why I mean, right now it's a big debate which is going on, like that should, from maybe for example, is a security peacekeeping force security required still in Somalia? Now, for a observer like us and all from the outside, we will say that, oh yeah, of course. Why? I mean, Somalia is a, like, if we say it's a very troubled country, it's very unstable country. So why not? Yes, peacekeeping forces helps. But then there will be there's the other side of the debate as well, that then what about sovereignty? Has it outlasted its relevance? All these deployments and etc. It's the same with anti-piracy patrols as well. Like what started way back in 2004, 5, or 8, it's continuing, right? It's still continuing till date. Indian warships are there, Chinese warships are there, French, US, etc., etc. Everything is there. But piracy now has shifted from East Africa or so Gulf of Aden to the Niger Delta on the West African coast, on Atlantic coast. Those are much more like troubled waters. So these are all like ongoing debates. I mean, right now there is a challenge to the requirements of peacekeeping forces, or where are they should be deployed. But in terms of like specifically what India will do, India will officially like support United, continue to support sending troops to UN peacekeeping forces in Africa. Some regulatory, some specific changes needs to be made in terms of, okay, let's only focus in this area, or let's not go in that area. Like something like those kind of changes will keep on happening. But broadly, in terms of India's effort to send peacekeeping, participate in all these UN peacekeeping missions in Africa, that is not going to change. That is going to stay the same. And secondly, with France, France again a very very important partner. But with France, all the security related cooperation has been it's limited to maritime security. But maritime security is only, like, I think, very important in that region, especially given what China plans to do, or it's trying to do there. Now, we have seen that, yes, there's a French overseas department territory called Reunion Island, right in between Mauritius, Seychelles, in that region. So naturally, then I mean, and India and France. I mean, recently we have conducted, our maritime Poseidon maritime reconnaissance aircraft that we conducted joint drills. It's not even coordinated. It's like, this is important. It's not even coordinated. It was joint patrols. So joint patrol basically it signifies that both from the Indian side and the French side, we started from the planning, execution stage, etc. was done together. Whereas coordinated, I mean, the people to people connect in a joint exercise is much more rather than a coordinated exercise. Coordinated exercise maybe, like, okay, India will handle this side, maybe Indian Navy will look at maybe the tabletop exercises, whereas French Navy can look at some other aspect of it. But when it comes to joint exercises, that means both are doing together from start to finish, so from conceptualizing to execution. So we are doing that. We conduct bilateral Varuna maritime exercises as well. France is a like strategic partner in terms of maritime security. India and France, we have the same vision also for the Indo-Pacific. For the Indo-Pacific, we both believe that the Indo-Pacific, stretches from Mount Kilimanjaro to Hollywood. It's not from Bollywood to Hollywood. It's from Kilimanjaro to Hollywood. So from the east coast of Africa to Asia Pacific. So yes, so France, in terms of maritime security, the opportunities are immense and it's very strong as of right now. If I can just sum it up with one word, it's at its peak right now, and it's only going to again it's increase going forward because we have the same vision for the Indian Ocean. And the most important development which took place in terms of India and France is that how India in 2020 we became an observer to this Indian Ocean Commission with French support. So Indian Ocean Commission is a tiny sub-regional organization which has 5-6 members. That is the island nations of like Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, Reunion. France is, I mean, through Reunion, obviously, then France also becomes a member. And now India in 2020, with French support, India also became a observer country to the Indian Ocean Commission. Whereas in reciprocity, now we have allowed France to become a full permanent member of Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA, recently. And through France's inclusion in IORA, basically now it has become a resident power of Indian Ocean. It's not, unlike, forget China, even the US is a non-resident power of Indian Ocean. China and US are non-resident extraterritorial powers, whereas France and India are Indian Ocean resident powers. So that is a testament to the strong maritime security partnership which India enjoys with France.
Yeah, I think it was
Thank
an
you.
interesting discussion. And as we are concluding, I would urge people to go to bharatpacific.com, as we will release this session on Spotify and Anchor as well. I'll thank Abhishek for this interview. Thanks for coming up, and we'd be happy to host you again in our discussions, maybe on something related to India and Africa again. I honestly consider that, like you rightly pointed out, the Indian and Western media just I'd say ignore it or pounce it upon whatever interesting happens in Africa. And I think we should talk about it. It's an interesting continent. It's a continent which is impactful for us. And I think we should keep having discussions on at least two regions which I consider which we less discuss, in the mainstream. First is Africa and second is Latin America. So it's certainly a pleasure to have you. And thanks so much, Abhishek.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Abhivardhan. Thank you, Aditya.
Opportunity.
Thank you for having me. Thoroughly enjoyed the discussion, and thank you for the questions. And look forward to coming back again soon and speaking with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.